Hi, I'm Arnie Reisman. If there were no plague, we would now be kicking off our seventh season of Poetry and Pie inside the warmth of Martha's Vineyard Playhouse. But alas, that ain't going to happen. Instead, starting now, on the first Wednesday of each month for the next 6 months, we'll be presenting an abbreviated virtual version of this tradition. Each time at 5 p.m., we'll present 3 poets reading 3 poems each, here online with me as your host. Let's get started with our first poet, Fan Ogilvy. And her latest book is called The Birth. It's about the Mayflower and a woman coming over here. She's going to now read 3 poems from this book.
Hi, I'm Fan Ogilvy, and I'll be reading a few poems. The first poem is called Sometimes It's. And you feel something so rare, you can give it only a word. America. The feeling of this air, the look of this particular sky, the smell of that grass, that earth, the scat of these cows, these deer, these raccoons, these geese, and all critters who mingle here are mixed in an aroma I call us. Every person has his or her mixture of air, of land. Persons from 1 to 100 identify a place they call America. Mine is a tall, bare-leafed oak, hugged by an evergreen pine-needled balsam, both commanding changing hues of the dying blue sky. Clouds catch a ride on the last words of this day's story. Deer look up to register gunshots. What I read as a fragile sense of democracy is overwhelming this rural scene. Now, quote, poetry should not have a trace of politics, end quote. I would say poetry is always calling out a political agenda. It's alive, fiercely living, and except for our Constitution, is the closest written call for freedom. Nor is it timid. Nor is it timid in saying so. I will say so. And Williams, quote, it's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found here, end quote. We have a rogue leader. He has shown us who he is. There was another such rogue leader in Germany, 1 or 2 in Russia, 1 in France, many in history, and now, power, guts. If these thugs could simply affect a small group, but no, they pull the whole country down with people toppled like dominoes. As a child of the Second World War, sadly, all of us are children of some war. We have had moments of pride, moments of shame. We bravely attack the shame and build honor in its place. We will continue that path because, as a former American president said, quote, but not yet, end quote. That may be the truth. This next poem is called Until This Coronavirus. I have to admit, I really didn't like people as an aggregate body, or possibly individually. Born nearsighted, I couldn't see you except up close and in person. I noticed others being close in ways I couldn't be. That's why some of us seek to be a leader. It establishes distance and wins superficial relationship. Where I could feel connected was in nature with animals, everywhere and all kinds. But now with COVID-19, I see a very endangered species, us, an aggregate like a herd of wildebeest. I see us blind and running from the danger, running from certain and not so certain death. Sheltering our young, protecting our aged. And for the first time, I love our kind, as helpless as I have ever seen them. This poem is called The Field. It's all about the grass. The women cultivate, grown by itself now, with help from soil, rain, cow, sheep, deer droppings. Who sees the effect of wind, mice, skunk, things that crawl, squirm, suck, sting, and bleed? There is an abundance. On a clear summer's eve, it turns to gold. Like a beautiful black woman shining in the rise of a full moon, or an Asian woman in the face of the full moon, or a Caucasian woman in reflected moonlight, or a Jewish woman with light in her surviving curls, or an Arab woman accepting the tree-covered light. The field covers all, enriches all, speaks of all in the individual golden stalks of grass.
Thanks very much, Van. Next is our Martha's Vineyard Poet Laureate, Jill Jupin.
Hi, my name is Jill Jupin, and I'm the current Poet Laureate of the island. First poem I'm going to read, I wrote for the poet Hayden Carruth when he was asked by Bill Clinton to write a poem about war and to go to the White House and give a reading. And he took the letter and hung it in his bathroom, and then he wrote President Clinton a letter in return. I'm being asked to write a poem about war. There are people who are killing each other. What can a poet do? If you were alive, tears would be streaming from your eyes into your beard. You would say, "Why have I wanted to live so long in a world of cruelty and longing?" I loved my neighbor who labored on his farm for his 50 cows, his 50 acres, treasured the falling leaves, the poor man's fertilizer, and we were poor in so many ways, but would never raise a gun to another. Our life of work and sweat and bleeding hands has made our hearts large enough and strong. Oh, unquiet rain, this pain is not painless. This poem is called Crows Gather Each Morning Like Cambodian Elders. Early each morning, the crows gather around and take turns cawing at each other, like Cambodian refugees used to gather in a tiny Vermont village, squatting in a semicircle, calling loudly in turn, discussing the state of their world perhaps, or the difficulty of raising chickens in a government-sponsored apartment while living with small children and old grandmothers, everyone talking at once. This last poem is, many of you have heard before, but it's a good time of year to read it. 8 December 1980. We lived on a dirt road that year, surrounded by Jersey cows, beauty, and snow. Unimaginable snow for the start of December. The baby was 5 months old, the best age until the next best age came along. You came through the dark and falling snow, and standing in the kitchen, stamping the outdoors from your boots, said, "Did you hear? Another hippie gone." I had heard, and I hated you for that, as the baby sat in his high chair eating Cheerios, because I had cried off and on all day. Nothing would ever be the same, until one day it would be. The news of what had happened in the entrance of the amazing building near the subway exit at 72nd Street and Central Park West blew around the world like an evil wind, and because we dared to love a man we didn't know. When at 10:50 p.m. a nervous guy, glistening with sweat and screaming freak spew, carrying double fantasy under his arm and the catcher in the rye in his back pocket, emptied his gun, things changed. People began naming their babies Dakota and reading the back of albums, trying to decide which song was the right song and how to trade one life for another and how to stop running in circles looking for a way to continue to take it all so seriously. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jill. And next we have Warren Wussner. He'd like to dedicate his second poem, one about our fishing derby, to the island's late great seafarer, Flip Harrington.
Hi, this is Warren Wussner, and I want to thank Arnie for inviting me to sort of be the first slice of the program, Virtual Poetry and Real Pie. I'm a little short on the pie right now. Halloween has just gone by, and I've written a number of poems about Halloween that are in my new book, Exit Sky, that is available at Kronig's and Edgartown Books, and of course at Amazon, where everything ends up. Halloween. Why is it scarier on an island? You can only run so far. Maybe it's the wind chimes under the arbor somewhere that can't be found, or the white fraying curtain waving in the window of the shed where there's no wind, or the dry leaves talking back to the wind I said wasn't there. The birds stop feeding and go where birds go when it's dark. How could I not know you'd come looking for me tonight? Were you the guy I passed at the side of the road, trying to hitch a ride to someplace? I know I'm not ready yet to go in that direction, but that you won't get out when my turn comes. The Derby's over for this year, but there's a poem about fishing I'd like to read called The Catch. Today I can't write about having a second cup of coffee or how I interrupted my wife's dreams to retrieve the covers, or even how that nasty blue clipped my line and vanished beneath the waves off Devil's Bridge. No, I must recall racing across the choppy sound for port, our power cat listing as the port hull filled with water, getting in from somewhere, and the bilge pump, no more use than coffee can bailing. Then the captain, our jovial friend, is our stern god, getting us into life jackets, grouping us to counteract the tilt, radioing the Coast Guard with urgency, well short of panic, we hoped, watching the breakwaters get closer and closer as we came in full throttle past the no wake signs. Fishers gawked from the rocks at the Coast Guard men who tossed us lines. They came aboard and we belonged to them. ER diagnostics, the hull fitting for the bilge pump broke off. Water got in with no way out, liquid ballast slowly tipping the ship. In search of the big one, we took a small bite of the sea, almost more than we could swallow, or Neptune hooked us, then threw us back into the air. No keeper in his ancient derby, no limit on mariners, but some days they put up a fight, spit out the bait, and get away. Go. Open house. It's November now, I know, on the island, and we're recording in October, but there are a number of poems about November that I've written over the years, and this one is from the latest book, Exit Sky. Open house. In November, the forest feels downhearted. Someone left all the doors and windows open. Fall is in foreclosure. The heat has been turned off, the light evicted, leaves fallen like fading for sale signs. Some tenants won't move. Juncos and sparrows pick off weed seeds. One robin brightens a hackberry. I sit alone on a stone bench. The old hermit, Han Shan, sits down with me. We scribble poems on dead leaves. Han Shan was a historical figure. He's a well-known Zen poet. Han Shan means cold mountain, and he lived as a hermit in a mountain cave and would come down and get food from a nearby monastery, and he would write his poems just anywhere he felt like, on rocks, on walls, on dead leaves.
Thanks very much, Warren. I'd like to wrap things up now with 3 of my poems. All of them can be found in my most recent book, Lightheaded in the Dark Ages. And like Fan's book, these are available all around the island. My poems are actually all plights: the plight of the season, the plight of our culture, and the plight of poetry. The first one is called Autumn. An oak leaf flushes, then falls. Nearby, a glass tube of mercury winces and drops. Somewhere, an old clock faces a charge and retreats. After mourning flowers at a gray funeral, a goldfinch flies south. After children's voices fade on a stone stoop, a pumpkin does a slow burn and dies. Finally, Americans join hands at dinner, give thanks, then take it back. This next one is called In the Age of Erosion. Are you listening? Slippery slopes replace attention spans. We used to know more, had the knack, the moxie, all the right moves of Fred Astaire, all the sweat of fully clothed sex. We mattered, they mattered. That's what we told ourselves, what we told them. Lip service is better than no service at all. Only motor vehicles absorbed shock. You could only play God in a house of worship. There was something to chew in voluptuous. Why are you in color when we're talking in black and white? We're going nowhere now, all aboard on plastic boats, run adrift and aground on a plastic sea. Superlatives are a dime a dozen. Everything changes the course of history, even a game of golf, for God's sake. We live in depleted times. The race is over. The flat earth society trots into the winner's circle on miniature horses. Defrocked bishops move diagonally across their flocks. The religious among us now seek probation, wait for the duck to come down with the secret word. The 4-letter code in the upper right of my Google glasses says it all. Tilt. We are merely anachronistic pinballs, doomed to bounce off one another, encased in a stained glass box of greed, not worth 10 cents if God help us. So there's no need for you to be in color, especially if you're not listening, especially if you've mounted a miniature. So just stand there ogling my ecstatic sister, who found out today she could actually listen to AM radio in the afternoons. And finally, my last one, called Writing Poetry. After a long day's harvest, nobody gets as dirty as a poet. Rambling around all those words, you don't know where they've been. You don't own them. They're borrowed. Some could have been rustled. Others have feasted in the dust. Between peeling classical posts or in fields of tropian tumbleweeds, concepts to toss, phrases to turn, antiquity stained, malnourished, needy, younger ones sheared and adjusting, homing in on the free range, still find time to roll with abandon in the sweat of romantic torment, to spring like border collies, herding thoughts, to lie in wait for the unexpected on an imaginary back 40 with real sheep. But in the simple silence of seclusion, sometimes writing a poem can be like going over Niagara Falls in someone else's barrel, in someone else's dream. And just when you want to scream, you're flying, then floating through widowed sunlight like a feather onto a new desk. And there you have it. Our first virtual poetry is now over. Thanks for coming. Thanks to our 3 wonderful poets. Each of these programs will be available on the Playhouse site throughout the winter. Hope to see you all again on December 2nd, when our poets will be Laura Roosevelt, Don McLaughlin, and Rose Steiner. Until then, please stay safe and masked. Fan quoted William Carlos Williams in her first poem, and it's worth repeating now as we close. Quote, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Unquote. Take care.